And welcome to Let 'em Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo. We got a really great show lined up for you tonight. And my guest is Jack Cole from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, a former New Jersey State Patrol officer and narcotics officer who spent many years undercover and in different ways trying to catch drug users and drug dealers at various different levels, and then turn around to oppose those very laws that he for so long actually attempted to enforce. And we're going to ask Jack Cole exactly why law enforcement officers themselves would be opposed to this prohibition regime, which has really been the law in America for many decades now. So welcome to the show, Jack Cole.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Glad to have you on. And we're very interested to know, because law enforcement and how the laws are enforced in New York City and around the country is the issue of the decade right now. And drug laws are a particular, probably drive more arrests than almost any other set of laws in the country. And many millions, tens of thousands in New York City alone are arrested every year, and many wind up in prison and wind up having their records and their lives ruined, and very difficult times getting jobs and things like that after they have a record. So is there a better way, in your opinion?
Absolutely, there's a better way. Let me give you a little quick history, though, on the war on drugs. We started the war on drugs in 1970, and when we started it really had nothing to do with drugs. It was all about power and a lot of racism and money involved. When we started it in 1970, the person that started it was Richard Milhouse Nixon. And like I said, it had nothing to do with drugs. He was running for the presidency in 1968. And he knew if he was a strong anti-crime guy, he'd give him a lot of votes. But boy, if he could scare the pants off those voters by just talking about crime and drugs, how they'd vote for him. And it worked. Mm-hmm. So in his first year in office, he got the U.S. Congress to pass funding bills that would give massive amounts of money to any police department willing to hire officers to fight his war on drugs. Give you an idea how large these things were in New Jersey. I joined the state police there in 1964, and when I joined them, we had 1,700 troopers and only a 7-man narcotic unit.
Wow.
6 years later, we had exactly those same numbers until October of 1970, when, thanks to these funding bills from the federal government, we went from a 7-man unit to a 76-person narcotic bureau. We increased the number of police doing one job by 11 times its size. And of course, in the coming year, we were expected to make 11 times more drug arrests than we did the year before. And that was a really hard job in 1970 because we didn't have much of a drug problem in this country then. As a matter of fact, if you go back and you look at the statistics from that year, you'll find that the likelihood of anybody dying as a result of the drug culture was less than the likelihood of them dying from falling down the steps in their own house. It was less than the likelihood of them dying from choking to death on their own food at dinner, but we started a war on drugs. So you got to wonder, why exactly did we do this? You know?
Well, in the White House tapes, where Nixon is actually taped, and him and Haldeman, I believe, are together, and he said, "What is it that these hippies like to do?" And Haldeman said, "I think they're smoking something called marijuana." And Nixon said, "I want something on that." And soon after that, they started interdiction.
He started the Schaefer Commission. All people that he appointed that were supposed to say marijuana is terrible, and after about 18 months, when they finished their investigation, they came to him and said, "This stuff shouldn't be illegal. We should legalize this thing." And he just buried it all naturally, because it wasn't the drugs he was using it for. He used it for a lot of things. Like the first people we were targeted on when we went out to arrest these folks was the hippies. Because, you know, remember, Mr. Nixon had another little problem. He had the Vietnam War going, and who was the big protesters out there was the hippies. And we couldn't arrest them for protesting, but boy, if we could get one to hand me a joint, that was a distribution of a controlled dangerous substance and they were going to prison for 7 years, every single one of them. And we just wiped those folks out. And once we finished with that, we were targeted against the Black Panthers, and we wiped that group out. So there's a lot of reasons for the drug war, but it's almost never has to do with drugs. But we fought this war now for 46 years, and in that 46 years we spent more than $1.5 trillion of your tax money and my tax money on that war. $1.5 trillion. Every year we continue it, it's another $80 billion down that same rat hole. And all we have to show for it, basically, is that in that 46-year period, we have made more than 50 million arrests for non-violent drug offenses in this country. 50 million.
And are those 50 million people who then went on to have a record and
absolutely
have
every one of them has a record,
and they have a hard time getting a job and a
Sure.
hard time getting into school and a hard time getting a loan and because of those records?
And of course, most of the people affected by this are people of color, young people and people of color. You know, if you want to learn who uses and who sells drugs in this country, it's very easy. You just look at the Federal Household Survey. It's done every year. And what it says is 72% of the people using and selling drugs look just like us, a bunch of white guys.
Right.
Only 13.5% of them are black folks. But now, who gets arrested? 37% of all the arrests we make for drug violations are black folks.
Triple the actual use percentage.
And who goes to prison? In our state prisons, folks in our state prisons for drug violations, 60% of them are black. And in our federal system, it's 81% are black. They're only 13% of the problem, Paul.
So from what you're saying, it seems to me that the drug war is really it's very hypocritical. It's an element of, it's a social control program, really. It's about making up a law that's easy to catch people at.
Yes.
In order to, because, you know, they have to buy it, they have to carry it, you can smell it, you can see it. I mean, you pass it to somebody, you have to get it from somebody, you have to give it to somebody. So all of those interactions and transactions are an opportunity to arrest somebody. And therefore, it's a great way of social control.
Great way of social control and a great way to make money for if you're in a police department. You know, the across the country, the studies show that about 20% of every police budget is based directly on the war on drugs. 20%. That's
Wow.
a lot of money going in the police departments. And that's without even counting the money that they get from the forfeiture laws. Are you aware of those?
Yes, and I was going to ask about that. What are the forfeiture? I'm familiar with them, but maybe you should explain to the viewers what could happen and the fact that your money can be arrested even if you can't be charged.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. It's basically a license to steal.
Yeah.
Law enforcers stop a car, and it started out, as most of these things start out, as a decent thing. We got the forfeiture laws in place because we had some fairly big time drug dealers that we'd stop in their Mercedes or their BMWs, and they'd have a couple kilos of coke in the trunk. And we could take the drugs from them, but the big thing you needed to do was take their money. And if you could take their money, that was really hurting them. So with the forfeiture laws, if you found a few kilos of coke in the trunk, you seized their car, you seized any money they had in the car, and it would belong to the state. But things changed over the years. And over the years, a lot of police departments, especially down south and out west, started, the smaller departments, started roaming the highways just to catch these people. And once we got to the point where we were using dogs to sniff a car and see if it smelled drugs in the car, what happens is a police officer stops a car on the highway. And one of the first questions most of them ask is, are you carrying any large sums of money? And A lot of people carry large sums of money, and they don't think there's anything illegal about it, so they tell the police, well, yeah, I've got $15,000 here. I'm on my way to buy a car. I'm going to pay cash for it, and I want I get a better deal if I do that. So the cop says, well, where is it? Well, it's in the glove compartment. And so the police guy says, well, I'm going to have my dog sniff that. And if the dog reacts that is money has touched drugs, then we seize the money and we seize your car, and we don't even arrest you. You're on your way. We could call yourself a cab and go home, because we don't charge you. We charge the money with the crime. And this is also the only crime in the United States where the victim is guilty until proven innocent, because the victim isn't a human. The victim is the property. And you've got to prove that property didn't come to you in any way because of a drug transaction.
Right, and that is
it's almost impossible.
Right, this is adding up to billions of dollars across the country, and
$4.5 billion in the last 5 or 6 years into law enforcement, and without a single criminal charge, being made against the people that.
Why isn't there an outcry against this?
Well, there's a lot of outcries,
yeah.
but it's not doing a whole lot right now.
What happens in the? I don't know if you know what happens in the legislature. I mean, I thought their elected officials, would say that we don't like the fact that our constituents are being stopped on the street and stripped of their money and cars for no reason.
Well, as I say, there's a lot of money and a lot of power to be made by keeping the war on drugs percolating. Mm-hmm. There's something around $500 billion a year spent on illegal drugs around the world. Mm-hmm. Now, of that money that's spent, there's not a single penny that it's not taxed for anything. So the people that are selling this stuff, they get all that money. So these cartels are making tremendous amounts of money. And when you're making that kind of money, $500 billion a year in money, you can afford to grease the wheels even before you have graft. This is before you even get to anything criminal like graft. Suppose I am a drug dealer. Well, the last thing I want to see is legalized drugs, because that'll put me out of business, right? I want to keep prohibition going hot and heavy and keep the cops out there as strong as they can be, because that way I can charge more for my drugs. So how do I do that? Well, people running for Congress, I'll give them some money for their campaign so that they are sure to get elected. And the people running, they don't have to do anything criminal, and they don't even have to know that this money is coming from the drug cartels, because it's very well laundered. But a lot of money goes into these campaigns. I'll guarantee you, to keep people in office that want to continue the war on drugs, because that makes the money for the bad guys.
I'm sure most people don't know the history of Ronald Reagan and the MCA. When he worked for General Electric and worked for the entertainment industry, of course, for many years. And the company he worked for decades was also involved with drug trafficking and mafiosa and everything you could imagine.
Yeah,
so I always wonder how the most anti-drug president could have actually been elected.
And he was in it rather deep too in the Iran-Contra affair,
right? As well, later on,
from 82 to 86.
Right. And, well, what do you think of that? Well, first of all, let me mention that coming up, Jack Cole is going to be speaking at the New York City Cannabis Parade this Saturday, May 2nd. And this is the cool, psychedelic-covered leaflet or poster handout card for the event on May 2nd. And it's going to begin at 31st Street and Broadway at 11 a.m. and then it's going to parade down Broadway at noon down to Union Square Park, and there's going to be music and all kinds of great acts. So, I mean, I'm not sure exactly who's going to be there, but in the past we've had Redman and Mortal Technique, we've had reggae, we had all kinds of events. Jack Cole is going to be speaking, other people are going to be speaking, so there'll be performances, speeches about medical marijuana at Union Square Park from 1 p.m. until 5 p.m. So for folks who want more information, want to have just a good time, and this is the 45th year, I think, as far as I know, almost half a century of the New York City Marijuana Parade, first Saturday in May, and this year that's May 2nd, which is coming up, so you can see Jack there, and we hope to see you all there. And many people who've seen the show have gone to the event, and I've heard about it, so come on to the event and have a good time, all right? So,
Paul, if I could tell them a little bit about LEAP.
Yes.
When I retired, I felt very bad about my role in implementing the war on drugs, so I sat down with 4 other police officers and we created LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. And on the way to creating it, we tried to figure out what should law enforcers really be interested in doing, and we decided there's 4 things. We should be interested in reducing death, disease, crime, and addiction. And sadly, all 4 of those categories are made infinitely worse by the war on drugs. So that wasn't what we wanted. What we decided we do want is we want to end drug prohibition around the world today, just like we ended alcohol prohibition in this country in 1933. Because looking at that terrible law from the viewpoint of law enforcement, we understand that the day after we ended alcohol prohibition, Al Capone and all these smuggling buddies were out of business. They were off our streets, right? They were no longer out there killing our children in crossfire, drive-by shootings, the stuff we have today. They were no longer killing us cops charged with fighting that useless war. So we know that if we legalize these drugs, we can take them out of the hands of the criminals and we can end this terrible prohibition violence, gun violence. And then once they're legal, and only once they're legal, we can regulate and control them. You can't regulate or control anything while it's illegal. The regulation and control of illicit drugs is in the hands of the criminals, and they haven't done a good job for us. You know?
Right.
Once we regulate them, we can end overdose deaths. These terrible heroin overdose deaths you see all everywhere, there is no reason for anybody to die from a drug overdose. In the 14 years I spent undercover and living in the streets with those folks, I can tell you nobody ever died because they shot more and more dope. They died because they simply didn't know how much that tiny little package of powder was really the drug and how much was the cutting agent.
Oh, I see.
Get too much drug in there, you're dead. It's like Russian roulette without a gun. And in an illegal, unregulated market, they'll never know. But we could save all their lives. And we think that's important at LEAP because if you save their lives, you got a chance to wean them off the drugs. And these are our children. They're our parents or ourselves. This isn't a war on drugs. It's a war on people, right? So another thing we can do is we can prevent half of all these terrible bloodborne diseases like AIDS and hepatitis C from ever even occurring because according to the Centers for Disease Control, 50% of all new cases of AIDS and hepatitis C can be traced directly back to intravenous drug users sharing needles. If the drugs were legal, they wouldn't have to do that. We could save all of those lives. We can go a long way to keeping it out of the hands of our children. Our children in high school, which have for 30 years have told us it's easier to buy illegal drugs than it is to buy beer and cigarettes. So,
Absolutely.
and it's only because they get carded when they go into a legal place to buy legal drugs. So why don't we make it as hard for them to buy heroin, cocaine, methamphetamine as it is for them to buy beer and cigarettes?
I know you've done some statistical work, and I saw some of the materials you sent me that actual underage use of and overdose deaths actually goes down in states that have
medical marijuana.
That's
true. There's been 4 studies about that, and they have determined that in the states where they've legalized medical marijuana, fatal motor vehicle accidents have declined by 9% and not changed at all in the surrounding states that haven't legalized. In the places where they've legalized medical marijuana, the suicide rate has dropped 5% overall. But for young men between the age of 20 and 29 years old, it's dropped by 11%. And I think we really need to think about that hard when we have our soldiers coming back from these wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and killing themselves through suicide at rates faster than they were dying when they were fighting that war. 2 a day are killing themselves every day.
And you think drugs are involved with that? Have an involvement in that?
No, the marijuana. Marijuana is,
Not
all
so
the
much
studies
drug-
show
yeah.
marijuana is a great thing for treating people with
I
PTSD.
see. I was thinking because the illegality is something, not marijuana, but some of the other hard drugs, I guess you want to call them, they constantly face the possibility of arrest or under pressure and treating yourself. You're basically treating your own depression and your own mental illness.
Well, yes, and that this actually, some people are doing that, and some of them are doing it with hard drugs. And in the states where they've legalized medical marijuana, and this is a study that just came out in August last year, and it's not a bunch of potheads put it out. It was the JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, put out this study that shows that in states where they've legalized medical marijuana, there has been a 25% decline in opiate overdose deaths. They're not even sure why, but they're sure of the facts, and no decline in the states that haven't passed it. And I would suggest that the reason is just what you were saying. There's a lot of people who try to medicate themselves for all kinds of different reasons.
They definitely did with alcohol in the 19th century, and they probably still do.
That's right. And where they've legalized medical marijuana, so many people are turning to that rather than to the hard drugs, and it is a pain. It does help you if you have pain to relieve
absolutely,
your pain.
And it's well known that it does. And sure. I guess getting back to what we started our conversation with is that there seems to be not the government and the authorities are focusing on the money. They're focusing on ways of social control and targeting their rivals and what have you, or being supported or supporting the drug traffickers themselves. They're not looking at health possibility. Matter of fact, they're not allowing there to be the studies. The studies are being blocked.
That's right. By DEA, who says
it's hard to get the drugs.
You can't study marijuana because it's a Class 1 drug, just like heroin, and we can't legalize it because there is no studies. But you can't study it because it's illegal. It's just this big circle. But Paul, we started LEAP 13 years ago, 2002, and in that time we've grown to be well over 150,000 police, judges, prosecutors, prison officials, and we have supporters in 120 countries.
120,000 law enforcement
150,000
law enforcement professionals
and other supporters that we have. Anybody can join LEAP, but in order to be a speaker for LEAP, you have to be a current or former law enforcer because that's the way we keep our credibility. We modeled this on Vietnam Veterans Against the War because those folks had tremendous credibility. We have the same credibility when we're talking about the war on drugs. Can you
tell me, was there a point in your was there a specific point where you've said, "What am I doing? Wasting my life doing this"?
Oh, absolutely.
What was that point?
That was just actually 3 years into undercover, because in the first couple of years we weren't working drug dealers because there just weren't that many around, and we were working the suburbs of New Jersey. To find a real drug dealer, you had to go to New York City or Philadelphia, or the biggest cities. They didn't exist in the suburbs, or certainly not rural America or our schools. So instead of targeting us against drug dealers, they had to make numbers, our bosses. So they targeted us against young people in college or in high school or in between. And we'd go out and infiltrate these little groups of maybe 10 or 15 young folks. Come Friday night, somebody would say, "Hey, you want to get high?" And if nobody said that, that was my job. Oh. And if anybody took me up on that offer, then one of the friends who happened to have access to a family car or some way to get to the city, we'd go around to the other friends and say, "You want to get high tonight?" And people would order, "Give me a couple joints or maybe a hit of acid." We're talking about $5 worth of drugs, right? Jump in the car, off they'd go to the city, they'd come back and they'd hand these things to their friends. When they handed it to me, they became a big-time drug dealer because that's what we labeled them, and that is what stuck. And every one of them was going to prison for 7 years. So in New Jersey, they had to serve 1/3 of max before they'd come out. So 2.5 years later, after I'd about every 2 months, I'd round up 100 of these people and we'd throw them in prison. And 2.5 years later, they'd come out of prison. They can't find work. Nobody will hire them. We snatched them off the street when they were trying to get their education. None of them were educated. But even if they had it, who's going to hire them? They're dope dealers as far as the public's concerned. So what do? They turn right back to the drug culture, the very group we say we're trying to save them from, only this time they become real, honest-to-goodness drug dealers. And every time you got a new real drug dealer, you got to have a whole bunch of new real drug users. So every one of them now is out there recruiting younger people to pick up those needles and become the next statistic. And that's how this became a self-perpetuating, constantly expanding policy disaster. Every year it's worse than it was the year before. We've got to end it.
As you arrest people, you actually create drug dealers, because that's the only way they can make a living when they get out of jail, and then they go up and storm up
and they create more drug users. Right. So then you go out and arrest them, and it just goes bigger and bigger and bigger.
And then
that's why 50 million arrests in 46 years.
And you can take all their money, you can take their cars when they do get arrested, and just keep all that. And you have people in prisons running the prisons, and more prisons being built. And now that's ending in, we only have a couple of minutes, but that's ending now in Colorado, Washington, Alaska, and Oregon, and soon California probably.
Next year, I'll guarantee you we will double the number of states. And by the way, it is, Uruguay is the first country that has legalized marijuana, and there are now 7 countries that have decriminalized all drugs for adults 18 years and up, and the 8th is just going to do it now, Ecuador. And in every one of those countries, they have a better situation today than they did when they had prohibition.
All right. How can people get in touch with LEAP?
You can go to our website. It's at, just go to copsaylegalizeddrugs.org or leap.cc, either one. Anybody that wants me, they can get me at on my cells, 617-792-3877. I answer any questions they want.
All right, great. And again, hope to see you at the rally this coming Saturday, which begins at 11 a.m. at 31st Street and Broadway, parading down Broadway to Union Square Park, where there'll be music and speeches, and Mr. Cole will be there, and from 1 p.m. till 5. So, folks, hope to see you there, and we'll see you next week. Have a great show, and have a great week. Thank you very much.
And if they want to march with our contingent, we'll even give them LEAP T-shirts.
They'll be leading the contingent. LEAP will be leading the contingent. Great.